Okay, so let's look at some reference quickly. Uh, First thing I looked at was some skeletal anatomy, mainly looking at things that muscles were going to insert on and originate from, things that are going to appear on the surface, like the shoulder blade and the hip. Also, got some of these images from scientific journals of potential Brachiosaurus anatomy, which we use quite extensively during the sculpt. Also, looked at some different artistic representations of these. Things like this model, which I actually have on my desk, to kind of define these muscles and these wrinkles and how I could apply them to the sculpt. To create the base mesh, I looked at a couple of different workflows. The first was the street cut workflow by Mashu Mishu, where he's built quite a detailed base mesh. He's defined a lot of the forms in his modelling software. He's also said he's added quite a few subdivisions in the head for kind of extra detail, and in the hands around those specific areas that are going to need more geometry. Another method by a guy called Fabricio Torres. He uses very simple base mesh, but you can, using this method, get very even divisions across the model. So for this, I went with Mashu Mishu's workflow simply because that was the one that I was more familiar with. So let's take a quick look at the base mesh. One thing that was a problem here was these poles around this area and these kind of larger polygons, which don't appear too bad in the sculpt, but they were still a problem. There's also a bit of an issue with this head connection up here with some poles and kind of uneven geometry in places. So yeah, that's the main thing that caused problems at this stage. There were a couple of things I looked at before I started sculpting. One is Matthew Cooling's workflow from the BBC's Planet Dinosaur. He's got kind of uses Scott Spencer's workflow, he actually says it here, where he's building up the forms using kind of standard brush and then adding details and muscular forms using clay tubes. Another really handy tip he has was to sculpt on layers, particularly for the fine details like wrinkles and stuff. Another example I looked at was Julian Romero's work. He's got some really nice wrinkles and things here, just kind of as inspiration for the kind of quality level I'd hope to get to. And later on down the line, kind of used these wrinkles and stuff as inspiration for the detailing. So if we look at the sculpt, I basically built this up using a similar way to Matthew Cooling, adding these wrinkles on layers. Just this went through several stages of refinement, basically. Originally didn't really have a fine level of detail, so I just kind of blocked out the forms using the standard brush and clay tubes. I just kept adding these extra muscular forms and also additional details on layers, and I kind of did this wrinkle pass a few times just to get it perfect. I listed a couple of different potential texturing workflows. One was from Dinosaur Revolution, and they've used ZBrush poly painting here. There's a few advantages to using this, mainly because of the cavity masking feature in ZBrush. You can get an awful lot of detail, kind of like when you dry brush Warhammer or whatever, where you get in detail in those crevices. So that was one advantage of this. Another sort of method I looked at was more of a hand-painted workflow. This is an example from Mashu Mishu, although I think he does actually use photos a bit in this. But yeah, I decided to go with the Dinosaur Revolution workflow simply so I could get all this nice detail from the cavity masking. Not really many issues at this stage. The only thing, which I'll talk a bit about later, is this kind of pixelation, because the sculpt is quite low res, and I'll go into how I kind of solve that problem more in the texturing section. There are a few problems during texturing. The first of these was that these wrinkles originally were quite pixelated, as I mentioned earlier. That was mainly because the sculpt wasn't at a very high resolution, because I'm working on quite an old machine. The way I solved this method that Greg showed me is to basically take a brush on a low opacity and paint along the sides of these wrinkles and kind of manually anti-alias them, and gradually you get rid of this pixelation effect. Another thing was that there wasn't a lot of variation in the diffuse texture in terms of lighting. So the way I got around that was a method basically that Mashu Mishu and a few other artists use, which is to multiply the green channel, which kind of simulates top-down lighting, over the diffuse. For the specular, desaturated the diffuse. Originally it was very flat and I wasn't getting the most out of the normal map, so I went in here with the dodge and burn tools and kind of added very light areas to places that I thought would really accentuate the normal map, where there were kind of these bumps and kind of form changes and things. Not really much to say about the normal map. There's a few errors here, like on the bottom of the foot and the tongue, which probably should be fixed if this was going to be a portfolio piece. I looked at two different workflows for topology. The first is one that's contained in this Gnomon DVD by Mayan Escalante, and he basically uses a method which he calls pinch points. You can't actually see it in this image, but what he does basically is tapers his edge loops inward, so that when they bend they kind of pinch. I did originally use this method on my original model, but I found when I got to skinning it didn't really work that well, probably not skinning it properly. So what I did instead was use Ben Maths' technique, where the top bone is 100% weighted to the top edge loop, and the bottom bone is weighted 100% to the bottom edge loop, and 50-50 either way on this middle one. And you get this kind of nice bending effect without this collapsing like it does here. So if we look at the final model, you can see these edge loops in action. I could probably actually use some more geometry to support this, because they do kind of get a bit blocky when they deform. Also made sure to have edge loops encircling the eyes and mouth, just areas that are going to deform, basically, like the top of these limbs here. Not really many problems at this stage, just a case of really changing the topology around so it deforms as well as possible. Okay, so let's take a look at this cat walk cycle. The walk cycle that generated, there was a few things I had to change. Firstly, these global parameters, mainly just the speed and the stride length. I like to imagine this is quite a slow creature, so I just kind of took these values down. And kind of all of these hub values, because it gives you quite a flamboyant walk cycle by default. Just took these, scaled these right down, especially on these hubs, kind of at the pelvis and the shoulders, where it was kind of really twisting really back and forward, which just looks kind of a bit unnatural, really. So yeah, changed those. Also, as I said, had to manually animate these end bits bending. As the original rig it generated, they were just static, attached to the end of this kind of forearm bit. So those were kind of the main problems encountered during this. It ran relatively smoothly, just a case of kind of changing these parameters really, and manually animating these bits and the jaw as well. Okay, so let's take a look at some engine stuff. A few main things to look at here. First thing I had to do was import the animations into UDK. So you can see we've got a couple of animations here. The walk cycle we looked at earlier, and also the idle animation, which I couldn't actually find the max file for, but you can see it here. So what I did with these was to go into this anim tree editor and basically use a blend by idle node to blend the two together. So if you look at this blend, it will blend the two animations into each other. Not really much to talk about here. All I had to do was really change the blend time, because the blend was a bit sharp to begin with. So the next thing to look at really is the physics asset, which basically controls the ragdoll effects. Because the skin wasn't that great, I had to scale quite a lot of these boxes to change how it ragdolls, and also had to, because a lot of these were spinning, had to turn on twist limited and limit the angle, and also for the legs had to limit the swing angle as well. So we go back in here and just have a quick look at that. Doesn't work particularly well, to be honest, but yeah, as I said, mainly down to not having a particularly great skin. You can see these bits twisting, probably the worst bit of this project, I would think. Okay, so let's look at some scripting stuff really quick. All I've done here is change the names to match my files, basically. So this one is just been changed so it matches the name of the file, and these two have been changed to change the controller class and the pawn class to the correct ones. The pawn file is the one that basically gets the dynos to follow us around. and all I've really done here is changed all these, like the skeletal mesh and the anim tree files, to match the ones in UDK for my dyno. Didn't really have to change any of this. All the draw scale was correct in the modeling stage. Max jump height, I don't know about, I haven't seen it jump yet. Yeah, no, same thing with this, not really changed anything apart from the R00 player bit, so it matches the file. Haven't fiddled with that at all. Okay, so this is the final result with the dyno following us around in game. I shall have to do a video showing this more separately, because I'm running quite short on time here. Okay, so let's take a look at the final presentation setup inside of UDK. This has basically got a simple 3-point lighting system on it, key light there, fill light, which fills in the shadows, and strong rim light from the back to really accentuate these forms and make them pop. I've also created 2 cameras which are animated using Matinee, and these kind of zoom in and pan up the dyno to really show off the details. I won't include the final video in this video, but you can see it on my thread. Okay, so let's get on to some industry and peer critique. One of the pieces of industry work I looked at was this Brachiosaurus here by Modulator. I think the main difference here is that the muscular forms are much more clearly indicated. I think he's got a much better idea of the anatomy, and also this head is really nice. I think one of the probably weaker elements of my piece is the head. The texture is a little monochromatic, and I've tried to avoid that in mind by adding these sort of coloured areas. But I think by comparison, my surface details like wrinkles and stuff look a bit repetitious, and could probably use some of these kind of bumps and spots like this one has. I also looked at this Brachiosaurus from Primal Carnage. This guy's added some really cool kind of skin flaps and spikes, which just really make his dyno look more interesting. He's also got kind of more colour variation, stripes and spots on his diffuse texture, which makes it look really cool. So I think mine could probably be improved by adding some sort of extra details like spikes or spots, and just kind of varying the diffuse a bit more. For the peer critique, I looked at Keith Lie's Allosaurus sculpt. I think this is really great. It's got some really nicely defined muscular forms, and I think my muscular forms could definitely stand to be a bit more defined. It's also got these really nice fine details like these wrinkles up by the neck and by the arms and the tail, and I've got a little of this in my sculpt, but I think I could definitely stand to add some more. To compare the texture, I looked at Alexandra Shapland's work. I think the hand-painted diffuse works really well, and I think by comparison my diffuse looks a little flat, and I think I could definitely improve it by kind of adding some lighter and darker areas just to show the recesses. Another thing is she's got these kind of feathers and spikes again, like in the Primal Carnage piece of work, which I think if I added some of those sort of details, really improve the look of the silhouette and kind of make it more interesting in general.